Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining in this session. We will be starting in a few minutes. In the meantime, you guys can maybe introduce yourself in the chat box. Guys, if your friends have registered, then they can start joining in. You can call them up. We will be starting shortly. So, Um, okay, so a very good evening to one and all. Thank you so much for joining this session. Yesterday we had a session on front end and we looked at some of the aspects of front end web development. This is a continuity to that session, and we will be seeing some of the aspects of backend today, and we'll be working on the same website that we tried creating yesterday. Um, Today we will be talking about the tech stack and use cases that are used in the backend web development, route controllers using Express.js, MongoDB schema, MongoDB CRUD operations, authentication and authorization, and then I'll show a demo session on how to use all of these. So, beginning with the tech stack, we will be discussing about MERN or mean stacks. So, these are the most common terminologies that we get to hear when it comes to full stack web development. So, for MERN, which is the short form for MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js, we'll look into each of this in detail. But yesterday we discussed about React, and we also compared React with Angular. So, when it is MERN stack, we use React for the front end, and when it is mean stack, we use Angular for the back end. So, coming to Node.js, it is an open source and cross platform JavaScript runtime environment. Runs the V8 JavaScript engine, the core of Google Chrome, and outside the browser. So, we can run the server side on our local machine. It's used by Netflix, LinkedIn, PayPal, and other companies. Express is the library that framework that we will be using to create our server. So Express is used to write HTTP handlers, create HTTP requests, and request at different routes that we will create for our app. Integrate with view rendering engines in order to generate responses by inserting data into templates. So that will be seen in a minute. So this is all you need to do to create an Express server. You just need to require Express, like create a port, create an app, and then app.get function request response, and then finally app.listen port and function. This is when your server starts, then this is what will be shown in your console log. Okay, MongoDB is open source NoSQL database management system. So there are basically two types of databases. One is SQL and another is NoSQL. What is the difference between both of them? So in SQL database, the it's also called relational database system. So the data that is there in a SQL database is usually related to each other in a tabular format. And in NoSQL database system, the data is usually not related to each other. They use key value pairs, like at least in MongoDB, the BSON data type is used. So that is binary JSON, and we can include keys from embedded documents and arrays. Also, one benefit of using a JSON type of storage system is that we can actually embed more data. We can use that nested storage system. Route controller using Express.js. So, what is a route? When you are searching on Google, you can see the URL where it is shown that google.com/search. So, that is a route that someone is trying to search something. And then when we click on routing controllers npm, the first link, we get this npmjs.com/package/routing controller. So this is basically a path to where what all will be displayed in that when someone is visiting this path. Um, Basic routing concepts refers to how applications endpoints URIs respond to client requests. When we use express app object that correspond to HTTP methods, for example, we want to um, send a request and get a response. Like when we clicked on google.com, when we try searching something, we want the links to show in response. So all of that is done handled by this express functions app.get, and this is the route which we are referring to. And request response is the arrow function that will request.send is again what will be sent in response. So it responds with hello world when a get request is made to the home page. So home page is usually referred to by the path is usually a single slash after the name of the site. So then there are app.get and app.post are other functions that help to create a get request. Get request is basically to get the data, and post is to post a data. For example, if you are trying to, like in yesterday's session, we wanted to create an advertisement. So when we want to post our advertisement, then we have to use the app.post function so that our advertisement gets sent to the database and is stored there. Other than post request to whom we route parameters. So we don't have to make different routes. For example, there are a lot of um, users having different user ID, and also they are trying to store their books. So we don't have to create, for example, there are 50 users who are, and each of them are trying to store 100 to 200 books. So do we create 15 to 200 routes for every single user? No, right? So for that, these are called params. So then there is slash users slash user id. So every user has a unique user id and then the book id they have. So request.params will usually be used for this kind of use case. So when we want to get a particular user's particular book that they want to see on their website, on their laptop, so they will we can use request.parents to get the user id and book id directly from this route. So we don't have to create multiple routes for achieving this one function. The concept of middleware is again, so as we saw in the previous examples, there's always a request and then there's always a response. So what happens in between these request response cycles? So a middleware functions have access to the request object and the response object and the next middleware function in the application's request response cycle. The middleware function is commonly denoted by a variable named next. So it basically stores the information of what to do when the after the response has been sent. Also, for example, you are uh, you want to search something on Google, but when you um, when you try to search for the first time, it asks you to create an ID, create a user ID. But once you have created the user ID, uh, during the second search, it won't ask you to sign up. You can just directly do your Google search. So when you are trying to search something before the data, so you have sent a request to see these particular links, and then you are waiting for the response that when will the data be displayed on your device. Um, in the middle of all of this, how does Google know that you have already made a account? And so that is what a middleware does. It basically cross checks whether or not the um, you have the ID or not. Okay, MongoDB schema is just this template that you use to store your data. Like how when you use post function, how do you want your data to be stored in the database? So that is what this is basically a skeleton for how you want your data to be stored in the database, so that when you are fetching the data, it's easier for you to again fetch each thing, like each um, object, each property individually. So let's just move on to the hands-on part. I'll just create a new folder. Um, although okay, I'll just create e-waste. So yesterday we worked on the front end. So for today we will be looking at the back end part of it. All the code is already there in the GitHub repository. So all you need to do is just git init, open a folder, and then git clone that entire repository. It has both the front end and back end part. So I'll be just doing that. Right, so just once, I think you can see um, the GitHub repository link. So all you have to do is just go to the link and copy this code, copy this link, and then clone the repository. You can run the command git clone and then paste that link. Start cloning. You should be able to see two folders. One is client and the other one is server. So we already worked on the client folder yesterday. Today for the backend part, we will be looking into the um, server folder. So there are a few things that you need to do. If you want to create everything from scratch, first you need to create a server folder, and then write npm init, and then start downloading these dependencies. So for that, all you can do is just npm I um, decrypt calls .env express json web token mongoose nodemon. So these things need to be these dependencies have to be there in order for you to get started. So all you can do is just npm I decrypt. Decrypt is for hashing. We'll get into that in a bit. .env express json token. You can just download all of this in one go. And hit enter, and then they should start installing. So I already have them, so I won't do it again. Also, one thing that you need to add here is the start script, so that when our server starts, it starts from the index.js file. Um, okay, so when you will do these two steps, you won't be having an index.js file. You have to create it, and this is where we will create our Express server. So first we need to require Express course and .env. So basically what these are is Express is the server, and .env file is basically the um, so .env file basically stores all the environment variables. We don't have to manually go ahead and put these environment variables in our local machine. Instead, we can create a file and store everything there, and then call it by using process.env. And that, for example, it's a URL variable that we created, and this is the Mongo, database that we created, and its URL. So we can call it by just saying process.env and .url, so that it will come. Before we move on any further, let's go ahead and create the database. For database, you can go to this link, MongoDB cloud/atlas. So you can create an account if you haven't already created. Otherwise, you can sign in if you have already used it. In the meantime, let's go ahead and see the other parts, which is again a very important functionality of backend is CRUD operations. So what it basically means is that create, read, update, and delete. These are some of the things that we want to do with our website. We want to create and add, and then we also want to read others' ad. If there is some mistake that we did, we want to update the ad. Then we should also be able to perform that function, and then delete ad once we maybe don't want it listed on our website anymore. So for the first operation, that is create, all we need to do is just db.users, and this is the basic syntax. So this is again, it's a JSON format like name, and then um, within double quotes you can write your values. So it's field and value, just the way we created our schema. Add schema, similarly that is exactly the way it will be stored here. Also, we have these things inside um, the key, that the type of this value that goes inside the key should be string and required true, as in it is a required field, you can't skip it. And then there's by default some empty string is there. Um, Similarly, there is read option, so you can use this function called find, and then there is update operation, and finally delete operation. So okay, for MongoDB, you can start creating your database. All you have to do is just go and create a collection, and then right. So you should be able to see the create button, and you get one database per account that is free. So I already have it. Right, so you can just go to browse collections if you already have one. Right, so this is where we can start creating our database. We can name it anything, and then there will be a collection name. So for in our case, there the name of the database will be e-waste, and then there will be two kinds of collections. One will be for ads, and the other will be for users. So whenever a user wants to sign in or sign up, we want them to have write down these things like first name, last name, email, password, and email password. So these are all required fields, but the number of ads that they have posted does not need to be a required field, so we've put it as false. And then by default, we can give it 0. And this is where the middleware comes in. So by the time we are trying to log in or log out, the middleware is trying to authenticate or like find out whether this user exists or not. Node module. Acha. Okay. After cloning, you have to actually do npmi so that all the dependencies that are there that get installed. So you don't have to like do this manually. You can just after cloning just type npmi and these should be installed automatically. And similarly, for the client folder we have done, and similarly we need to do the same thing for our server folder. So yeah. Um, so for creating the routes, we want two types of routes. One is user routes for sign in, sign out, and sign up functions, and then there's add routes. So for this one, we want either like create add, delete add, update add the routes that we created in the front end. Those we want to create in the back end as well, and then make them functional by trying to store them in the database and then also fetch them whenever we require. So again, for ads schema, we have title content as required. Author can be required. Author is directly the user who the username that we will be giving, and then there's author ID, which is something that will be I think done automatically. So this is app is listening at 4000, which is our port. That is what we have given in the index.js while creating our server. Port. We'll just create a variable called port and then just name it here again. So this is what will start our server. Other than that, for creating routes, right? So here is where our all the CRUD operations are happening. So first again for router we require the router and then router dot post compose. So this is, if you remember, this is the route that we created yesterday and the same route we are going to use for our database as well. And then there's an asynchronous function. We with const user request dot user id and so this is for posting. Acha, I'll just explain. Right. So let me. I think I have signed up before. Right. So email already exists. I'll try to make different. I'll just sign in instead. I've already tried. Um, okay. So for user, the two users exist. I'll just delete them from the database itself so that you can go ahead and sign up. In the meantime, if you have any doubts for what we have discussed so far, you can put them in the chat. Once we have signed up, let's just sign in. Right, so after signing in, we can see these routes. So when I go to create ad, you can see that this compose slash compose route comes here. So this is what exactly we have tried to create here. And post function is basically for creating an ad, right? And then this const user id request dot user id is basically is the user id that got created here. Yeah, so this object id is basically what it takes, and as you can see that there's a first name, then there's a last name, then email. Password is hashed because of using bcrypt, and I'll just show how bcrypt works. So again, similar method. You require bcrypt and then use that hashing um, logic, and it will basically just change your password and hash it so that like the people who have access to the database can't figure out what your password is. So we'll try creating an ad here and then just write random things about a phone maybe. Screen is something was random, and after clicking submit it shows ad saved successfully. These are just simple things that you can add for better user experience. So when we go back to our main homepage, we can see that a new ad has been created. For example, I want to update the ad. I don't want it to be a phone. I want it to be maybe a camera. then I can update and it should show phone camera instead of phone. Similarly, if I want to delete the ad, I'll just delete and it will show no ads found. Other than that, right, so do we have any doubts so far? I hope everything is clear till now. So this is for configuring the database. You can just require Mongoose and then export the database and then again use it inside your index.js. Connect DB and then just config. Okay, so this connect DB was exported from config. Inside the config folder, there is a database.js file, and we can require it because it was exported here, and then use it to connect to our database. Also, another thing is that, for example, we don't have the client, right? Maybe we'll just run the server, not the client. So we'll go to localhost 4000. The server is running at localhost 4000. We can see that there is a message called backend server is running, and that is because we have added we will request for the server to run, and as a response this is what we are getting inside the h1 that the backend server is running. So you can also add some ui for the backend, which is usually not done and also not required, but just for um, just uh, other than that, for user API, this we can just get the ads and use them wherever we want and display them. Moving on to the authentication and authorization part. So there's a difference between both of them. Authentication is basically determines whether users are who they claim to be. So that is typically happens when you're trying to log in or you have already logged in, and maybe when the middleware is in action, it challenges the user to validate credentials, for example, through passwords, answer security questions, facial recognitions, or like pattern recognition questions sometimes. And it's done usually before authorization. For example, employees in a company are required to authenticate through the network before accessing their company email. Determines what users can and cannot access. Verifies whether access is allowed through policies and rules. For example, you cannot, for example, in this website that we had, if you have not signed in, then you cannot try to change someone else's ad. So that is, you're not authorized to change the ad someone else posted. So that is what authorization does. Finally, let's have a look at the sign up system. Take user details, that is first name, last name, email, password that we already saw, and then convert the password into a hash form that using the bcrypt.js package. Then store this information in MongoDB using insert operation. So again, a new user and then new user dot email, all of this you can take, and so this is router.post. So for example, someone tries to sign up and these are the things that they enter, which gets into the request.body. And then once it's done, like user sign up successful, then it will show a message. Right, so a new user created, and then so I just created my account here, and then all the messages come. Any doubts? If you guys have any doubt, just put them in the chat. For login system, we can take the email and password and convert the password to hash to match it with the hash stored in the DB while signing up. And if it matches, if matches is found, then generate a unique ID token and send it to frontend. In frontend, it is stored as a cookie in the browser storage. Until the cookie is stored, user can perform all the CRUD operations. If match is not found, then a negative response is sent back to the front end. And we can actually customize it however we like. We can like maybe show a message that user not found or something like that. Um, yeah, so you can create your own DB and store it in the DB config, or like do this entire thing inside your index.js file directly. It's totally fine. Um, right, so I think that's that. You can clone the repo and see it for yourself. Maybe add few things and remove few things as you like. Create your own UI. If you guys have any doubt, we can take up. Otherwise, I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining in. You guys can follow us on our social media channels, and hope you enjoyed the session. Um, in the meantime, you guys can just fill the feedback form. The session feedback form is shared with you guys, and also go through the repository. And if you guys have any doubts, then also you can comment and we'll take up some doubts. I really hope you guys found the session informative. It wasn't really possible to hard code everything side by side, but if I hope that you got a fair bit of idea about the concepts that we discussed today. And if there are any issues or any doubts, you guys can maybe put in the chat, and we can wrap it up, I guess. Um, Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you so much for joining in. Do fill the feedback form and follow us on our social media channels for more upcoming sessions